right. We will go ahead and call our meeting to order at 9:35. Welcome everybody to SEEP. Just want to take a moment as we celebrate Veterans Day this week, and thank all of those who have served, will serve, are serving our country. Express our gratitude for them. And it is also National School Psychology Week. And so recognizing the important work that those professionals do to support our students with disabilities as well this week. And I'll also just take a moment to tell you all, some of you may already know this, but last week I had the pleasure of serving on a national panel with Assistant Secretary Glenna Gallo with OSERS at US Ed, and highlighting the inclusive practice work that we're doing in our state, as well as some of the results that we're seeing. I know some of you may have seen last week our press release that went out from the department that talked about the graduation cohort increases. And really exciting news that our student with disabilities grad cohort rate increased even more than that of regular students. And so just really exciting. That is a combined effort of work around our school systems, our educators, and of course the parents and families and all of our stakeholders and support groups. This is definitely a group effort in our state. It takes all of us. I tell people all the time, it is not a one-person show to make the improvements that we need to continue to make in our state. And so I really appreciate all of that work. And it was a real honor for me last week to be able to talk about our state on that platform and the work that we're doing and the improvements that we're seeing. So let's get our agenda rolling this morning. I'm going to ask Ms. Hargrave if she will call roll for us to get us started. Push the little button. It should turn green. Oh. Here. 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 Rebecca Huff. Here. Randy Holly. Here. Lagoon Clark Jackson. Carolyn Jurek. Latrice LaFord. And we will look for possible. Here. Michael Thompson. Here. Thank you. So we do have a quorum, so we'll proceed with our agenda. Just before we do that, I'd also like to make an announcement. Our interpreters are not here this morning, and so just want to raise awareness. That's not the best accessibility for me in my standard. We do have Miss Beard, who's hard of hearing, on our panel. So if everyone will please speak into the mic, be clear. It would also help if you look at her because she will read lips. And I've also offered if I need to repeat anything, do not hesitate to ask, Rebecca, you know.
Find out with an interpreter next to me.
Oh, well, there you go. There you go.
Fast interpreter.
But definitely want to do everything we can to make the meeting accessible and make sure you can participate with us. So our first agenda item is our approval of the minutes on September 17th. Can I have a motion? Thank you. We'll need a second.
Yeah, we have a second.
Oh, we have it.
Yeah.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Great. Any discussion on this item? Any public comment on this item? Chelsea? Okay. Any opposition to accepting our meeting minutes? All right, seeing none, we will move forward. That one requires no action. Our second agenda item is we have a couple of informational reports. The first one we'll address is our state systemic improvement plan. We'll need a motion in a second. Motion? Dr. Ross, Carino, sorry, excuse me, second? Great. Okay, great. So we have a couple of things today that we really want to have some discussion around. We're going to go a little bit easy on y'all today. Y'all have done a lot of work at leading up until this point this year. And today we really won't be looking at or considering any policy, but we'll be having some discussions about some actions that we may want to take on a couple of these items moving forward. So I want to introduce you and remind you what our state systemic improvement plan is and why we may want to think about updating it. So our state systemic improvement plan, we also call it the SIP for short around here because we like acronyms a lot. This is a required piece of our federal reporting from the U.S. Department of Ed each year. It is a multi-year plan, so it is one indicator in all of our federal reporting that we do to the feds every February. It is a multi-year plan to improve outcomes. It cannot be a compliance measure. It has to be a results-oriented measure. And we'll talk about what our current one is right now. It's important for our SIP and for us as a department and as our division who is responsible for this plan and is responsible for this reporting that we have the stakeholder involvement anytime that we want to make a change to one of our indicators, whether it's how we measure it or what we're measuring, that we have that stakeholder involvement and discussion, including our parents, our LEAs, and of course our panel is one of the main ways, excuse me, that we receive that input and feedback on what this particular indicator is and what's important to us as a state. So I know we've reported on our SIP with you all annually when we talk about our SPP, our APR, that big federal report that we do annually around special education. And this is one component of that. One of the things that I wanted to kind of preview for you all and just give you what it currently is. These are the required components. So as part of that state systemic improvement plan, we have to have a theory of action, right? So what are the things that we are going to do to get whatever the result is that we're measuring? It has to have a measurable result. I liken this to a goal on an IEP, right? What is that annual thing? What is that annual result that you want to measure? There has to be infrastructure improvement strategies So what are you going to do to reach that desired outcome? It has to be based on evidence-based practices, and there has to be a plan to review data and evaluate that state systemic improvement plan and whatever that result is that you are measuring. And really, this conversation is part of, in my mind, a key component of our evaluation of where we're currently at with our state systemic improvement plan. The current measure has been in place over 5 years. I've been in this role for 3, and it hasn't changed. We haven't talked about changing it or thought about updating it. And I believe it was set probably back in 2019 when this first became an indicator as a required part of our federal reporting. And I don't think it's changed since then. And I don't believe that there have been any conversations kind of going back and saying, okay, this is where we are. And this may be an improvement that we want to make to our current measurable result. So those are the required components as a part of that indicator. This is the current theory of action, and I'll pull out a couple of things for you here. And so you have the strategies that are included in our current plan. So data-informed decision-making, evidence-based literacy practices, and in this idea of continuous leadership and PD. So if the LDOE implements data processes with our LEAs, with our schools, how to understand our data, and I'll talk to you about the result in a minute. It is based on ELA LEAP in grades 3 through 5. So if we help our schools and our school systems and teachers understand that data and what it means, if LDOE effectively provides literacy practices, literacy-based practices grounded in quality text, serving students with disabilities in grades 3 through 5, if we effectively provide that PD and develop our leaders around both of those things, how to read and understand the data, what are evidence-based literacy strategies, then we will see improved outcomes in literacy for students with disabilities grades 3 through 5. Okay, that's in a high level, that's our theory of action. So notice that focus on grades 3 through 5. So it's telling you through this theory of action a little bit about what's the target group here and what's being measured. This is our current result, our current measurable result, or that goal that we're looking at. Our current, and so this one, our acronym, we call it the SIMMER, right? State Identified Measurable Result, is to increase ELA proficiency rates on statewide assessments, that is LEAP, for students with disabilities in 3rd through 5th grade. And there is an 8 school system cohort across the state. So when the ESIP was initially rolled out in 2019, the feds recommended really focusing in on a cohort group of schools. And so right now, our measurable result is based on a small number of school systems and schools, about 28 schools at 8 different school systems, okay? It's measured each year by dividing the number of students with disabilities in the cohort schools who scored proficient, which is mastery, on ELA LEAP by the total number of students with disabilities in those schools who took the ELA LEAP assessment, okay? So that is what we're currently measuring. Again, I believe in 2019, when the ESIP became a federally required piece of reporting, that the feds recommended you start small and then eventually scale up. To date, we have not scaled up this focus in our state. So that's one of the things I really want to talk with you all about. And when we talk about why we need to currently evaluate this and why we may want to make a change, one of the big reasons for that is the scale up piece, right? So we may want to expand this focus to all students in grades 3 through 5. We could also look at all students in grades K through 5 now, because now we also have our statewide literacy screener and we can start measuring literacy results for our students with disabilities in a standardized fashion much sooner. And we all know we've talked about literacy as a priority of this panel for our kids. And we know that many of our students with disabilities are identified because they have a reading challenge, right? And it is the foundation. It is key. If they do not learn how to read, they will not be successful, right? And so it's been a real priority of us, I think of this panel and of our state, to have this as a focus. So think about that. So we've got a relatively small target group here that's represented. We've talked about the importance of literacy. We also think about another piece why I've heard other states, and as we work with our national data center group, IDA Data Center is a national partner, technical assistance partner that we've worked with, and we've had some of these conversations with them. You also want to align what you're measuring to any new statewide initiatives, right? So we have a lot of new, we have our new statewide literacy screener. That is a measure that we didn't have when this initial result was written and this initial target was written. So that could be a great reason for us to think about changing it and expanding this target. And so, like I said before, and I want to reiterate with you all, we're not bringing to you a proposal today. We're having a conversation to think about this. What you all tell us and the conversation we have will lead me to bring back to you a revised measure, okay? So the goal here is to have a meaningful plan and a process that includes all of your input. As we think about potential changes, as we choose to expand this measurable goal, and it's got to be one that will have a significant impact on our students and our families, okay? So these are a couple of considerations, and then I want us to just have some open dialogue about it and about our measurable result. And it would have some implications. So if we keep that literacy focus, not all of our theory of action may need to change, but we did see in that theory of action grades 3 through 5 referenced. And so if we want to expand that to say a K to 5, we can. And that's a pretty easy update to our theory of action as well. So a couple of things to think about as we get into discussion about this. Should we expand the target group to all students with disabilities in grades K through 5, not just in these 8 school systems? And should we expand to that literacy and LEAP ELA focused measurable goal? So we've got a couple of other states I've looked at. Mississippi is one who uses a couple of different measures. So we can still write a goal that talks about increasing proficiency, because we have a proficiency standard on our literacy assessment, and we have a proficiency standard on our LEAP ELA. And so we could combine those measures to have a measurable result that is expanded, that says something like we will have that increased literacy outcomes based on proficiency on a literacy and ELA assessment in grades K through 5, right? And so that denominator, so our total number of students gets bigger. It's kids that are taking the literacy assessment and LEAP ELA. And then our numerator is students who are scoring proficiency on both, considering both of those assessments, right? So just some food for thought there, just some conversation that I would like to have, and kind of get your thoughts about that measure, and any updates that you all think might be important to this. We'll open it up for some discussion. Go ahead, Ashley.
Just a couple of comments. I really like the idea of expanding both the grades and adding the literacy component piece, the assessment outside of the LEAP. I think it makes sense. How did we or how did y'all, as a department, choose the schools? And is it a combination of charters and traditional districts? Do they like make up both, like a very large, small, rural, urban, the populations of students with disabilities? Like, how is, I guess, all of that done? And was that a decision that sort of SEEP went with, or approved, that y'all wanted just sort of a small population? Like, why wasn't, I know that you said the Fed said to sort of start small,
Mhm.
but I feel like not including all students with disabilities just really didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I felt like it was
Yeah.
sort of,
I agree with you, Ashley. Those are great questions. It is very limiting. I believe, so right, you all know I wasn't here, but I do believe that SEEP was very much in the conversation. They had to be, because really all of the APR and federal reporting and the SIP are designed around this idea of stakeholder input. And your state panel is named as a required person in all of that federal reporting to consult with. To be honest, I truly believe, so this was really aligned with, I don't know how many of you remember the State Personnel Development Grant. It was called SPDIG, okay, another acronym. That particular grant work is exactly the language from that grant work, which is now over, is the language in the current state systemic improvement plan. So they aligned it to a current initiative at the time, right? I think to pilot some work around ELA curriculum, how to make it accessible for diverse learners, for students with disabilities, which I think my piece, and I agree with you, is at this point, really, we have been and should have been in a scale up phase of this for quite some years now, right? And so I do think that our focus should remain more on all kids with disabilities. So I'll tell you the school systems that are involved. There was likely a lot of consideration about representativeness. So in any time when we talk about federal reporting, they are always interested in, even when we do parent surveys, we're trying to look at representativeness. Do the parents who are responding to our surveys, are they representative of students with disabilities and their families across our state? So there was probably some thought of representative. I will say there's only one charter school represented. The other 7 school systems are all districts. So we had Calcasieu, EBR, Jefferson, Lafayette, Point Capiz, Sabine, St. Bernard, Orleans. They feel very central and south heavy for me, which is something that I don't like to leave anybody out, much less our northern folks. But it does not feel representative of the northern part of the state for me. But those are great questions, Ashley. I knew y'all would ask all the A game questions, so I tried to come very prepared to answer those. Yeah.
What are those areas again? Calcasieu, East Baton Rouge?
Calcasieu, East Baton Rouge, Jefferson, Lafayette, Point Capiz, Sabine, St. Bernard, and Orleans. So so there's one school in Orleans and it was the charter. Yep.
Yeah, you've only got one,
Yeah,
Northwest Louisiana.
exactly. Exactly.
Could have been Shreveport, Monroe, and Alexandria especially.
Caddo, right? Huge, right? Yeah.
That's not representative very well. Yeah.
I mean, my recommendation, and if, would likely be to expand to all in K-5, really focus in on the literacy piece, I don't mind leaving the LEAP ELA in grades 3 through 5 because it will also tell us how those literacy skills are transferring over to that real content heavy and writing heavy assessment and how we've prepared those kids for success in grades 3 on LEAP. But I really, really think that, and we have this includes a lot more work, right? Because then comes all of this strategy that we also write into this plan and the action steps that we do to move that measurable result. And we're seeing improved outcomes in our state, but there's so much more, right? And I know we've talked a lot on here. So for example, one of the things we are very interested in, and we work very close with our literacy team, is a phenomenal partnership, probably one that should be replicated in every state. But we would also like to have some literacy guidance for students with disabilities specifically. Because one of the things that we find in our school systems is all does mean all, but if we also don't get really specific about what does the research say, what is best practice for literacy, evidence-based literacy, which this is all about. If we don't get really specific for that, then we leave that to be desired by IEP teams, by our schools, trying to do what's best for these kids. And so, so I think there's a lot more here than just making our measurable results more inclusive and more representative. But it is step one. And I do think it's time for us to take a look at this measurable result and say, okay, what do we want to do with it? And you guys kind of direct me what you want to see and I'll bring it back to you.
One more question. Does
Mhm.
this take into account growth from like approaching or like unsat to approach, or is it just that proficiency mark?
I had that
It's
same
just,
question.
yeah.
If there was a reasoning behind why we didn't look at growth versus just that threshold of
Yeah.
proficiency.
So it does. It just looks at and measures proficiency. What that, it doesn't mean. So there's another piece in here that I think you all are onto, which I'm really interested in, is it will ask us what other sets of data did you look at when you are looking at this result, whether or not you were successful in meeting your targets each and every year, what additional data did you look at? And I think that's something that we could do. So if we have that, you know, your measurable result has to be very standard, right? How do we measure it? How do we report on it? But I think to your point, Sally, like what other measures, what other information can I bring to you all? Can we report on here that we looked at and considered? Because whether we meet because I mean, we would want it to be rigorous, yet attainable. But I think giving us some progress and some growth type points would also be really, really helpful, in determining progress. I like that.
Wouldn't it allow you to be able to look at the effectiveness of the literacy curriculum based, because it's different in different places?
Mhm.
So it would allow you to look at it as a whole state, but then individually in each district as to which part of the curriculum is correct, is working.
Yeah,
Because I know there's some that are more effective than others.
absolutely. Where are
And-
those high performers and what is the curriculum that's working best for our
and-
kids?
and-
I love that.
And then going even further into the differentiation pieces
Mhm.
of that curriculum, which is some of the, is very difficult
that.
for our teachers to understand when we're sending out teachers. That's the most difficult area to teach them to do. We
Mhm.
can teach them, but when they get in the field, it's different. It looks
Yeah.
different.
Yep. Absolutely.
I think too, just to go back to the growth piece, I think year after year for teachers, for parents, school systems, it's like a continuous just slap in the face when they don't hit that one mark. But
Mhm.
they may have gone from unsat to basic or made just one, one growth, which for that student those teachers and the administration is huge.
Mhm.
And I feel like that growth gets dismissed by just the structure of our accountability system in general. And I think if we have an opportunity to add some sort of growth component in that other area that you were
Yeah.
talking about, I think would do everybody just a lot of good. I feel like teachers would feel
I
that
love
they
that.
succeeded. These kids made growth. It was recognized. I think school systems in general, I think it would sort of shift that, like listening to the accountability system or the council talk about, the incentives to serve certain populations with the way our accountability system is structured. Awarding growth to me is just so important. And if we can find a way to do it in here,
Mhm.
I would really like to continue to have discussions around that.
I like that. And I know exactly where it would go because it says like describe additional data and additional progress toward the simmer. Yeah. And so I like having that, how many of these students move from one proficiency level, one performance level to the next? Absolutely.
So do we also have to determine the goal as far as what percentage of students like to see in that proficient range or hitting proficiency? That would be a question. And then also we need to think about the third graders because that's going to be your overlap from that literacy screener because they take it as well as they take the leap. And so when you're looking at proficiency for the third grade population, are you going to look at proficiency for the literacy and or the leap? What if they make one and not the other?
Are we going to count both
Yeah,
measures?
so
Yeah.
just kind of look at, are we gonna count them twice? Because
Mhm.
they're,
Mhm.
so maybe we need something as well.
Yeah.
Of how we would address the third grade population.
Okay. Yeah, that's definitely something that we would need to determine, right? For the third graders, do we use the literacy? Do we use the leap, a combination of both? I think there would be some options there. We would need to set targets. So when you change the measurable result, remember, I believe it was 2020 with our previous panel, some of you were on there. We reset, not reset, we set the next 5 years of targets. When you reset this measure, we will have to set those targets moving out. I think that's more discussion we would need to have when I bring it back to y'all with an actual measurable goal revised. These are my initial thoughts with that is what we would do is take that revised measurable result, pull that data based on the most current data, see where our kids are at. That's your baseline. And then figure out what is that measurable increase that you would want to see over the next couple of years. When I think about our current students with disabilities and the increment of growth we are seeing each year currently on LEAP has been about a 1% growth each year. So when I think about that initially, the increments of improvement each year can be whatever we deem them to be, whatever we deem is rigorous and also appropriate. So 1%, as I think about that, and I think about what we're currently seeing in terms of progress for our students with disabilities on standardized assessments. Now, I would want to pull and see for these grade levels specifically, but I would think we would want to see at least that amount of growth incrementally, 1%. I would like to see more than that. But we can kind of talk about what that increment of growth, what we would want to set that as. But that would be something that we would need to do together as well as we.
Like including our Leap Connect students, what's the measurable goal? Like, how does all that factor in with Leap Connect?
Yeah. So in the current measurable result, they are not included. That doesn't mean that we can't say, all right, we're going to look at percent proficient in K through 5, and it would include 3 measures, right? It could include our literacy proficiency, our literacy assessment proficiency, LEAP ELA proficiency, and any students who are on alternate assessment, their LEAP Connect ELA proficiency. Is that something that you all are interested in adding? Too many measures? Okay.
Represent all students, then we need to represent all students.
Okay.
And my next question, I think, would be, are we bound just to ELA, or could we expand and also look at math? Do we even have, with the new literacy screener, numeracy screener coming forward, is it too soon to add that just yet because that's a newer component? Or would you possibly look at 3 through 5 for math? Is that possible?
It's possible. Probably too many things to put into one measurable result. It does not mean that as an agency, as a department, that we're not and should not be looking at those foundational math skills as well. We are and we should. But I think for the sake of this particular measurable result, we should probably keep it focused, right?
What's the connection between this measure and the accountability system measures?
So the only connection is it's the same assessment, same proficiency level, right? This is more of this is still accountability in a way. It's accountability to our federal reporting and specifically proficiency around students with disabilities. They connect for sure, Dr. Bell. Like, we want to see proficiency for these kids growing in this measure. If they're growing in this measure, they're going to be growing for our school systems and for our state and our larger accountability measure for sure. Yep. Proficiency is proficiency. And so I do think that's an important piece for us, is to keep that measure the same. But then when we look at that section on additional data, we can talk about how many of these kids grew from one level to the next, right? It's a good question. Okay.
Number of certified SPED teachers declining. How does that factor into this at all? Like with your data collection, like are we taking that into consideration, having non-certified teachers?
It's not a part of this particular measure. However, I mean, you're making a really great connection that having content strong individuals who are trained in literacy supports, that's the piece that within that theory of action where we talk about building the capacity, it's not going to go back for me, building the capacity of our special educators that we have around best literacy practice and how to best support these students in closing gaps in reading. It's certainly connected in that theory of action as part of the strategy that we need to help boost literacy performance for these students.
I think kind of related to that, if you look at our theory of action and look at all of the ifs, there's really nothing in there that indicates that we're targeting like students with disabilities. I mean, it says just serving students with disabilities, but every other piece like structured data inquiry process, evidence-based literacy practices grounded in quality text, develop leaders, all of that could be applied to just our general schools. So maybe we need to look at like adding in pieces that are specific to our special educators or, stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also comes in the body when we report as well, like what specific strategies, what actions have we taken to support literacy as well. But yeah, I like the specificity piece. That's what it was. Okay, good. Now I can go back to it. Yeah, so like it has that student with disabilities piece when you talk about the then and the results part. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you all say is that you are with us and up for a change in terms of both scaling up, in terms of being more representative of all students and of really connecting to all of our literacy initiatives happening in our state as well. I'm also hearing that you all want us to consider looking at as an additional measure that we report, not necessarily the simmer, but as an additional data piece, looking at how students are progressing from one achievement level to the other and how many are making progress in that way. And also considering including Leap Connect as well. And that's something that I'll work really closely with our data and analytics team on in terms of is our literacy assessment, Leap and Leap Connect, how those things are connected and how we might put those all in a similar target, right? It could also be something with our Leap Connect students that we describe in additional data. But I do like how you all are making a connection. So, and remember, our simmer has to be results focused. And what I really like is we have additional ELA and math targets in other indicators in our report. But the way that the U.S. Department of Ed likes us to report on those right now are in grades 4, 8, and high school. And so this gives us a much deeper dive. This particular indicator and an update to this goal will allow us to have a real deeper dive into how well we're preparing our students with disabilities in terms of literacy and their reading skills. So I really like it. I appreciate that feedback. Any other points that you all want to make or discussion or things that you want us to consider? We will take all of this, bring you all back. So this would not change. Remember, we report every February. So the coming report will report in the same way. We have to go through quite a bit of engagement and discussion before we could change. But my goal would be to have this changed for our February 2026 reporting. It feels so strange when we plan that far ahead, but we really do have to in order to make the needle move. So what we would do is at a next or later SEEP date this year, bring you back based on what we have all talked about in your input, bring back edits to our measurable results and what a final decision might look like for you all to make a vote and endorse that. Okay. Any other comments for the panel?
Would the data be reported down to the school level like it is with the accountability system?
Schools will still get that school level data. It is the same data. For this particular report, it will not list, it's a roll-up, right? Of all students with disabilities. It's kind of a high level picture. So within this federal reporting, it will not go down to the school level. But schools do get that information and that data. I don't know if Christine or anybody wants to talk about that. That's at a school level and how you receive these scores, but it does go down to the school level.
Yeah,
Same
we do
data.
see it in multiple ways at the school level and a district level to be able to use that information to help us make decisions moving forward, whether it's programming or supports. So there's multiple, not just one, but we do see it time and time again in different platforms and areas.
Good point. Do we have any public comment on this item, Chelsea? No public comment. Anything else? Any opposition to this item? All right, we already have a
I don't have
motion.
any opposition, but
Go
I
ahead.
can't. Feeling ignorant a little bit. I know I asked the question about, and you give us the parishes, the district
Mhm.
that this is being compiled from, right? And I mean, and we're reporting that as if it's statewide information. And is there any movement in a way that would include all the regions of this state that would really be a statewide reporting instead of just South Louisiana and only one northern parish? And how could we affect that if possible?
Yeah, great question. So we do describe in here, and I've tried to be very intentional that this particular indicator right now is representative of a cohort. I can add some language to that in our current reporting. We won't be able to change anything about our goal for the current reporting. We still can't get that changed until 25, 26, until I'm able to bring it back to you all, get everything set. But to your point, Michael, we can definitely add additional language about the cohort schools. For example, we say that our simmer is analyzing student with disabilities performance representative of a cohort of schools. So we can detail that out and make sure that that it's clear what we're reporting on.
Right, so we're licensed through LEH and the state has they have the state and other things that break the state up in regions, like 1 through 9. And that could be a way to break up the state for this information that we're.
Which regions?
It would accurately reflect state information statewide. Otherwise, you're not really getting, I don't know if any of the, you've got a lot of stuff going on in Rapides Parish and some of the others, Caddo and West Monroe.
Yeah.
Be nice to see that in there too.
Absolutely. And that will also be part of the conversation when we talk to the U.S. Department of Ed of, hey, this is our proposed change. This is what we're trying to do here. Here is why. Part of that is this idea of representativeness across our state as well. So definitely. Definitely. This is certainly why I'm bringing it to you all. Definitely thought it was time to take a look at it and make a change here. So we appreciate that. Anything else? Any other closing thoughts from anyone? This has been really helpful and will certainly help us bring back to you all an updated proposal for this. So I appreciate it.
So next item is to receive report information on pupil appraisal, eligibility, and evaluation. And motion? Second?
I second. Great, thank you. And I am actually going to invite up a team member, Miss Karen Becknell, who leads our pupil appraisal services and support across the state. So to get us started on this item, want to have some conversation around pupil appraisal, eligibility conversations, evaluation for students with disabilities that really will lead into a piece where we bring back to you all actual proposed policy change here. 1508 has not been updated in quite some time. We did update it several years ago, just the VI criteria to come into national compliance with that. But as a whole, we haven't considered Bulletin 1508 and what some of those updates may need to be. There's been a lot of legislation that has passed that impact child find. We'll talk a little bit about dyslexia. So bringing some of those pieces together and taking a look at 1508, we had no reason to rush this. We do want to get it right. And so we want to talk a little bit with you all about what are some of the stakeholder conversations that we've had, and then really have a discussion with you all today, again, so that we can bring back a really good policy draft for you all to help give us some input. So our discussion this morning will just kind of help guide us in what are some additional updates. So our Pupil Appraisal Handbook, which is Bulletin 1508, covers all thing regulatory when it comes to pupil appraisal. So when I think about child find, when I think about intervention requirements, evaluation requirements. It will define, based on federal law, what are our exceptionalities. It will talk about and define related services, right? So our state policy has to align with federal IDA, but there are some places that are state specific, right? So we do have some things that we can take a look at in 1508. All of our evaluations, like I said, have to comply with IDA. So we have to keep that federal guide in mind as we start to think about what are some potential updates needed to Bulletin 1508. We have been working on this for a little bit, and I'll turn it over to Karen. We've been working on this for several months. We've been talking with a lot of different stakeholders, right? When you talk about Child Find, when you talk about a pupil appraisal team and all of the professionals that are involved in that process, we really need to hear from all of those various stakeholder groups to feel like we land in a place where we've had ample stakeholder input. When we think about parents, right? Have we had enough stakeholder input to get us to a place where we feel like 1508, this will be you don't want to, I don't like to open bulletins over and over and over. So we want to take our time, engage all of the right folks, and get this right so that when we do implement 1508, that the next time we open it is only because we have to, right? Not because we missed something or we didn't think about a particular piece. So I'll turn it over to Karen, let her talk a little bit more about the different stakeholders that we've been engaging with and some of the things that they've talked about, ideas that have come up, concepts or issues that have come up that they really wanted to address or that have come to our attention as a department, even from stakeholders, from parents, and then we'll let you all have some conversation as well.
Good morning, and thank you, Meredith. So as Ms. Jordan has told you all, we've been meeting with work groups in specific disciplines to look at each section of the bulletin and see where we need to make some changes, do some updates. It may be something as simple as a typo that was in the last one. So something as simple as that as to more involved restructuring. Some of the things, again, we've been meeting over the last few months with our different work groups. They've made recommendations. Again, the stakeholders have been primarily with pupil appraisal personnel from across the state. You know, they give direct services to students. They are the ones who use the bulletin every day in the work that they do for evaluating the students who are struggling in the state of Louisiana. Some of the things and some of the recommendations that have been suggested already are we want to develop a toolkit with approved state evaluators and protocols for gifted and talented. We are looking specifically at dyslexia under SLD. What does that look like as far as the parameters for evaluation? Which assessments should we be giving? And so we're going to list dyslexia under SLD now. And but what that looks like. Updating the screeners for APE. We have a group that's really been working hard on that. They are restructuring and updating the LMAP that is used out there in the field. We're also looking at including the process for addressing RTI in the referral and evaluation of students for occupational therapy services. There's a lot of work being done under the OT section of Bulletin 1508. Also with including information or a reference to the guidebook and including the categories of executive functioning, sensory, and computer access under assistive technology. With other health impairment as related to mental health diagnoses, specifically talking about mood and anxiety disorders. We're having discussions that these areas may be more appropriate under another exceptionality, but again, we're looking for input from all of our stakeholders. Also more clearly defining the statement under other health impairment as related to ADHD and who can, you know, diagnose it. We want to make sure that we're not just saying that a doctor or a nurse, it can be anyone like a psychiatrist or someone, as long as it is under the scope of their practice where, you know, we get that information from. And we want to have this clearly outlined in the bulletin. We're also looking at what do support services look like, being more with, giving more of examples of what that looks like from a pupil appraisal perspective. Also making sure that we include statements that let LEAs know that you cannot delay an evaluation because of an intervention needing to be implemented. So outlining that in the bulletin as well. Those are just some of the areas that we've talked about, looked at. Again, we are meeting myself and another coworker who is no longer with the department. We were the leads on it. And so we've been working back and forth together and meeting. We met with Meredith to discuss some of the updates that we've looked at. We're also, again, these are the areas that we want to target: the mental health services, school health services, assistive technology. So we want to provide more support about the SBLC process, talking about, you know, more support with what behavior observations should look like when we have students who are having behavior problems, social emotional behavior assessments. So that's where we are. Again, this, once we kind of get it tightened up more, we will bringing it to you all for your input as well. If anyone, I guess I should give them my email address if they want to. Okay.
And then
So-
we'll open up for discussion.
Okay. If you all have any ideas or suggestions, some of you all work directly with Bulletin 1508, feel free to email me at karen.becknell@la.gov. That's karen.becknell@la.gov. BEC, karen.becknell@la.gov.
Yeah, so if y'all want to, if you have any thoughts, concepts about evaluation, about child find, about any of these particular areas, it could be something that our group hasn't even thought of or talked about. Feel free to let us know. So we'll kind of open up, have some conversation. And then if you guys go away and you go pull the bulletin and you have some thoughts or some ideas, don't hesitate to email us as well. Rebecca?
Thing we have talked about in the past was, the evaluation of educational interpreters. Is that going to be considered in this as well? Okay, well, in this group, we've spoken about it, so I didn't know if that.
When you say evaluation of interpreters, tell me more. Tell me what you mean.
The sign language proficiency rate, like, you know, are they using, is the district, it's not really streamlined whether they're using ASL or if they're using signed exact English or pidgin, like a combination, home signs, or kind of, I've been in situations where teachers have kind of made up a sign, you know? So I feel like that is definitely impacting our deaf students, and they're definitely tied into their literacy as well. There's so many strategies for teaching deaf children with ASL, you know. So I just feel like having something more streamlined and making sure that we have highly qualified interpreters in place for our students. Very important.
That makes a lot of sense. So that also ties into certification bulletin, which Rebecca, I know you probably know as well, that the Commission for the Deaf is also looking at this as well. So, but I would ask you, Rebecca, we can work together on this too, to look at that deaf hard of hearing section in here and see, is there anything for our students in terms of evaluation and eligibility of them that we need to be aware of, or adding anything or changing anything there? Yeah. Anything else that piques y'all's interest, Bambi, and then we'll go to Angela.
Just to tie in to what Rebecca, that's the right name, was saying, I think that that's a real problem, and I'm not sure how this ties into 1508, but as she said, school districts are using things like SEE or other things besides ASL, and that has a real impact on the way that these students are able to, go on to post-secondary education and those type of things. If they don't have a good foundation of ASL, which is the sign language, I think that's the sign language that is mostly used across the country. It makes it really difficult for them to be able to be integrated, even if they have a good education and a good understanding of those other subjects. They can't move on to other areas in life because they don't have the language that they need in order to do that. So that's really important. I'm not sure if that actually ties into 1508, but it's just something, the bigger picture that we need to ensure that all of our schools have those qualified ASL interpreters for those students and good instruction teachers who understand deaf education as well.
Yeah, and I think for me, what resonates is like what y'all are saying about, and I think that's what goes in here is, and we may have something, but we can look at it, right? Is it good enough? Is it where it needs to be? But what does that communication plan look like? Like, do we have, for those students, once they're identified, what does that communication plan look like? Is it specific such that the student can be successful in their instructional programs as well? Yeah, I like that.
I had a question from Ms. Becknell. Is that- So you were saying you were looking at specific assessments for specific exceptionalities, like within Bulletin 1508, naming those assessments?
Under dyslexia, because I get a lot of questions from the field, specifically about dyslexia under SLD, like what should we be giving as an assessment to identify those students? And that more in that area. And like Meredith, I look at what trends are going on around the country. And some people will have like a spreadsheet that'll tell you, these are the best assessments if you're looking at a student for SLD, for dyslexia under SLD. So no, not just saying.
So like a resource.
Okay, I got you.
Not saying.
I just want to clarify that, yeah.
Yeah.
Have in order to do this.
But
Just
in
as a resource.
policy, we can make sure that we're aligned to any legislation that says you have to assess for X, Y, and Z when you're considering, because we have that in Act 517, I believe, where it will say for additional assessments for dyslexia, you need to test for these couple of things, and making sure that piece is aligned, and then providing guidance and resource to school systems about what do I use? What can I use? What are some
Okay, and
options?
in that same area, the dyslexia.
Yeah.
I know that's probably the biggest question I get about, I was a diagnostician, so it was definitely, so the SOD, how are you trying to marry those things, that into that? Because we have 504 over here that has pretty much covered that dyslexia for many, many years. So how is that going to, is it just kind of what's the discussion like about that? So.
A lot of what came out in the new guide, the updated guide, and those steps, like if, once you get past, is it just a 504 or is it more? So in the new dyslexia guide that went out, I think in August,
Mhm.
there are some steps that you go, but again, one of the things I do want to include is a checklist, or if we're looking at SLD due to dyslexia, using this checklist or this guide to say, these are all the things that we looked at to make a determination that this is a student that just doesn't have dyslexia and we're going to put them in a 504 plan, but they meet all of these parameters where we can say, yes, we're gonna give them the exceptionality of SLD due to dyslexia.
Okay, so if we're, I'm sorry, I know. So if we're looking at a student and I'm giving him a Kaufman test of educational achievement, and I've got a strength and a weakness, which is going to give him an SLD profile, what additional assessments would
Exactly.
you?
The other one, the other assessments, and I can't, I'm not. I don't
They're
have
in
it
Act
front of me.
517.
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay.
That are gonna fall under there, that you look at the, phonology, things
The
like
phonemic
that. So,
awareness,
and
reading
that's
fluency,
what
all those.
Parent
is to
interview.
outline those specifically under
But-
dyslexia so that LEAs can know these are the areas that we needed to assess to say we're making a recommendation based on this
So-
information.
So those are going to be in that standardized test as well. So, but you're going to do additional measures is what you're saying.
Is there any representation from Cato in your work groups? Okay.
In my, I have a pupil appraisal, advisory council, and they're the ones who've been working with me on it, and I do have the person come talk.
Wondering, since we're talking about occupational therapy, is dysgraphia being discussed?
I have, made mention of it because I know that is too an area, and again, looking at the trends from over the country, a lot of people, a lot of, schools, state departments do include that because, and I think I've mentioned it to Meredith in the past, it's gonna come, that's gonna be the next question,
There's no one in many parishes that even test for it, or, look at it.
We've had it in discussion as well.
We'll put that as an area to look at it. Do we need to specify anything for too?
Calculus as well.
Question about the, dyslexia. So I'd like to know where you are about, I guess, what in addition to you're required to, like, when we're writing IEP, what are the services, what services might look like? Like, are there additional steps that we have to take because of it, we have like SLD, reading fluency, or reading comprehension? Some of that falls under that too. So are we having to do something in addition to that? Dyslexia, component added on.
That literacy guidance we talked about. Yeah, absolutely.
So will that be out?
Yes, yes, yes.
The next question I have is about dismissal of related services. Is that something that will also be discussed in, the bulletin, because that's been a huge issue?
And what do you, because I know maybe each LEA does it differently. And so, because I do get emails with folks asking, what should we be doing? So if that's something that we need to look at and include, we can, giving guidance as to how it should be done when you want to dismiss those related services.
And then if they're dismissed, or like what's the follow-up, and then if someone comes into audit and they still see that initial, it was like, well, no, this student has OT, and then they were dismissed from OT, like, what's that process, what does that look like? So it's not always clear, right?
And again, I think it's more of an LEA. It just looks different depending on where you work.
I think that should be tied to a reevaluation determination. During that, so
Yes, it should be.
an assessment data showing that that service is no
Is
longer.
no longer needed.
Does extended school year fall under 1508? Extended school year. Yeah.
I is not in 1508. It's in 1706.
I had, two things that I see come up a lot, in clarification around educationally impactful and what that looks like. Yeah, with determining an exceptionality or not. So especially if we're looking at social, emotional, behavioral issues, but they're, it's not affecting their grades or their scores or anything like that. So maybe some guidance there, because I get that a lot. I hear a lot of
Mhm.
conversations about that. And then the second thing would be with, I guess, a shortage of school psychs and others that can assess. When you're making a list or when there is a list created of all the different kinds of assessments, who
Yeah.
throughout the protocols
capable.
can actually give those assessments could be helpful for districts. Any other comments?
Within the discussions around dyslexia and dysgraphia and dyscalculia, are there gonna be, this may fall under reevaluation as well, but I know that sometimes age affects that diagnosis as well. So like, whereas a very young student can't necessarily be diagnosed with dyslexia because all students are swapping their letters. So, is that gonna be within there too? And maybe like, I don't know, encouraged a certain age where they're reassessed for that if they're identified very early?
My best practice would be, again, like you say, to look at it through possibly the reevaluation
Right.
process. We know that reevaluations typically take place every 3 years unless, it's needed prior to that. So again, like you said, like with students who get occupational therapy, kind of once they get to be a certain age, we look at them for maybe dismissing them from services because they kind of maxed out on their, benefit from it. So again, that would possibly be under the reevaluation process.
Yeah. And just a reminder too is, we're looking for kids with dyslexia in K through 12, right? Because we know there are a lot of students who may get to middle school or high school and were never identified, and we'll see that happen. And we also have, remember, we have a required kindergarten dyslexia screener now as well. And we're working on sort of the next steps for that in terms of the additional core assessments that are also required if a student comes back with an at-risk screening. So quite a bit of dyslexia updates happening in the past few years in our state as well. Ashley.
I really love all of these. Since reevaluations got brought up, and I know we had briefly touched on this at one of our previous meetings, is there discussion around ensuring that students are reevaluated regardless if the parents like, no, I'm good with, whatever? Because like when the April Dunn Act passed, I got called in. Kinder Discovery was one of the charters that I worked really closely with. And they were receiving kids in 9th grade that hadn't been evaluated since elementary school because parents were just signing off, not, okay, don't worry about it. I know this isn't specific to that, but since it got brought up, is there discussion around changing requirements around reevaluation to ensure that kids entering high school have had some type of reevaluation done regardless if parents say you don't have to do it? So there's accurate data available to school systems when these kids get to high school.
Yes.
You don't have to go any further than that.
yes.
I don't want to go
Yes.
down like a whole different rabbit hole, but
No,
since it
yeah.
got brought up.
I mean, we've talked about this a lot, and we may have talked about this in relation to other things. For example, when we just most recently talked about you all endorsed, and we talked about changes to our alternate assessment criteria,
Yes.
right? And making those decisions that are critical for students, and making sure that we have up-to-date data when we're making those decisions. So that all of this, very interestingly, right, in special education and in education period, all these things are tied together. We're definitely talking about the reeval piece. And I think that will probably be something that when we bring it back to you all, might be a piece that we spend a lot of our discussion on, whether we want to think about, and we'll bring you some options. whether or not we want to think about limiting the number of waivers, like how long should a student go before we do a reeval and we do some current updated testing. I know we've got LEAs on here as well, who are in the weeds and doing these assessments and reevals all the time, every day. And so I do think this will be a piece that we talk about, and is certainly something that possibly prompted us to say, hey, like, let's take a look at 1508, like it's time, right? So yes, you have hit on a passion and a piece that we will definitely talk about.
And Ms. Augustine and myself were talking this morning about the waivers. I think that's kind of like talking about. And, the best practice, we always say you don't need to do back-to-back waivers if that's what you're doing. And, really looking at that RDR tab and getting more information and, to include for the student every 3 years or as needed.
Yeah, and I will certainly give credit, like the department has at least put in a piece where with the reeval data review piece, to where we aren't just handing parents waivers to sign, like there at least even now should be conversations where we've talked to the teacher, hey, what do you think about, and they have to enter this information into SIR now before they even get a waiver. I'm looking at Rebecca and Christine too, but they have to talk to the teacher, talk to the eval team, talk to the parent. Hey, parent, do you have any concerns, additional concerns? And they've got to like type in and report that data to us and say, I've gone to all of these IEP team members and they have said, no, we don't need a reeval at this time, before they can move that forward in SIR. But that doesn't mean that we may not need to look at some policy too,
Yeah.
right? If
It's
y'all want to
different.
add anything, ladies.
It's
feel free.
different, because it's not in writing anywhere. Every district decides
yeah.
how, they want to roll with it. So several years ago, I cut out waivers all the way around. It's not happening. And then have to have some ed testing to see what these kids are. And so not saying that everybody needs to do that. That's just what, certain districts have found is beneficial, because when you know more about your kids, you know what kind of decisions to make. So we have just found that would be helpful. And so that was the direction. Not that it's in writing anywhere. It's just a step that we decided to make.
And we have several that do that.
Yeah.
Rebecca?
Yeah, and that's kind of how we've gone about it too. And we're also finding under the social emotional part of things with the mental health diagnosis, that through our MDR process that we're doing a lot of reevaluations, digging deeper into that, because we find after repeated behaviors that there's something else going on there. So instead of just letting it linger, and we're digging deeper. And on the lines of that, one of my questions is, so with the shortage, kind of piggybacking off of Christine, of school psychologists, is it a possibility of adding the psychometrist? I might not be saying that right. I'm not people appraisal. I don't have a people appraisal background. But I know that is one area that our people appraisal staff has requested, because we're currently having to piecemeal a psychologist together this year. Thankfully it worked out, and I actually have somebody that's able to come in districts. Last year we had to do virtual. That was not the best option, but it's the only option we had. So if we could add that to
Are you
the
thinking about that,
options.
like in where we talk about the section on like qualified examiners and
Right.
what that?
Because I know Mississippi allows it, so, Texas, yeah. So if that's a possibility, that would be great.
Files from what they used to, from what I understand, eds to do IQ testing. And so that has been a huge thing, for several districts. They need a psych just for ed for the IQ part.
And I'm sorry. And on that note, if you're changing the criteria with SOD with dyslexia, you're going to increase the number of students being evaluated with SOD. And that's going to increase the need for more psychologists and diagnosticians. But here's another question I have. So what are going to be the requirements? What are the requirements for RTI changing under that, or is that still going to stay the same? Okay. And what additional data would be needed to add that, I mean, as far as RTI data,
It's gonna be the same.
same, okay.
I think the only difference you're gonna look at is the
Yeah, the
testing, which
testing.
tests are
Okay.
certain that fall under, hey,
So-
these are ones that we look at specifically for dyslexia, but other components will remain the same.
Right, and I can see where, okay, you've tested those, you screen the kids at kindergarten, you do the additional assessment, and let's say you have 20 kids in a school. I mean, I don't know, if you have a large school, okay, so how, you got to determine, okay, how many of those 20 kids are we going to continue and do a SLD evaluation? So I guess that's where that checklist you're talking about comes with.
Exactly.
Okay.
And your SBLC and that decision tree process. Yeah.
It's basically not going to look different than any other exceptionality. It's just that we have to now be specific about dyslexia under SLD per, you know. the-
Connected to our state
cognitive
laws.
letter, And it's
Yeah.
through IDEA, it falls under there. Any other comments from the panel?
I do just want to say thank you for doing this and opening this up. My people appraisal staff personally, thank you all because they've had many questions the last couple of years. So I think this is going to help them.
I appreciate that. And I think, I like when we like bring you all to meetings and require you to do a whole lot of policy work and voting. But these are also some of my favorite where we don't have to rush and we can have conversation and get it right and get all of the concerns addressed in a way that makes sense for, our kids and our families and our LEAs that are working through, all of these processes as well. So this is huge. We have even more notes to go back with, in terms of our work group and go back to the drawing table and say, you know, let's go back to these particular sections. But also like, don't feel like you're bugging us or blowing up our emails any more than they already do just by emailing us your input, because we really do take that into consideration and it's really helpful because we want to get it right. And we want to get all of your thoughts represented, before we bring it back to you. And you continue that really hard work of drilling down the language. It's easy for us to talk through, but then for us to go back, compare with federal law, state law, and then draft some language to bring back to you all that we dig into more. So we'll have a bit more work to do on this as well. We'll probably bring back a draft, in January. So if you want to take a look, dig deeper into 1508, send us anything else that you think of, that you see, or if you have any questions, don't hesitate, to reach out to Karen. And we'll be happy. Anything else that y'all want to say or any other topics before I go to public comment? No? Y'all did a lot of great work. Okay, we have one public comment, Tracy Walker. And we definitely have a public comment hot seat. Come on up. If you'll make sure you turn your mic on. Oh, where did I turn it? But I have to click it. And I'll-
Now it makes me nervous. Hi, my name's Tracy Walker. So I have a daughter that's 19. She's autistic, nonverbal. She did graduate high school. We're from Wynn Parish. We live in Rapides Parish now, but talking about dyslexia, she aged out of speech therapy in 4th grade. And it was difficult because there was never another reevaluation. And I was just gonna say, she's still nonverbal. It would have been great if it would have been, I don't know if there's any more discussion about maybe, I would hear that she didn't want to cooperate, but she's severely autistic and she would want to get under the desk because she wasn't really prompted to come out from under the desk to try. And so it's pretty heartbreaking, and I just wanted to say, thank y'all for this panel, and I'm gonna get emotional, so I'm gonna hush before I cry.
Absolutely. We appreciate you and all that you do for our students. Our parents are huge. They're huge stakeholders for us. And just listening to your experiences help guide us for what needs to change. What improvements do we want to make? Because I think all of us are sitting here for that reason. We appreciate you. Sure, get me emotional on today. Okay. Okay, so we had a motion in a second. Do we have any objection to receiving this discussion and report? Seeing none, this item takes no further action. And that concludes our agenda for today. We will see you all back on January 22nd to continue some more work, very likely some additional policy work. I hope that you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy your families. I can't tell you all how much to our public and to our panel, how thankful we are for you, that we get to do this work alongside you and make an impact. So enjoy your families. And we will see you all back after the holiday, which sounds so weird to say. Happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all of it at once. Thank y'all so much. Move to adjourn. We actually don't need a motion for that, so we're good. Yeah, recognize.